Hey guys, it's Kane here. Welcome to my channel. In this video I'm gonna show you how to create folders and files. Especially we're gonna work on text files. We are going to write information into the text files as well as reading it. So without losing any further time, let's get started with creating a new project. So since this project is about files, I'm just gonna call it files operations file operations app. That's exactly what we're gonna do. I'm gonna work on basically on buttons to create the folder, the file and stuff like that, and I will try to stick to static names as I create them, but technically you don't have to do that. You can take the folder name in a text box, create a dynamic folder name. You can do the same thing with the file names and so forth. The idea here is to create folders and files, not to make it a dynamic or a fully capable application. So I'm just going to focus on that aspect. First thing first, I'm gonna drag and drop a button and call this button as create folder or something like that. That will make sense to us. So I'm just gonna go in here and say create folder. So before we create our files, we need to know how to create folders, because that is where the files are usually stored, and it will give us an upper hand in organizing our files. So in order to create a folder, we're gonna use directory, which is under the systems IO, and we're gonna use those features, the library, in order to access to a series of statements. So I'm going to change this button name to button folder. So coming here, button folder, or you can say button create folder, which will make more sense, and double click on it. As we double click on that, we are going to type our folder name. So I'm going to come in here under the class section, because I'm going to use this folder name quite dynamically. I will type it as string folder name, which is under C drive. So I'm going to put that symbol, the @ symbol, put the quotation marks, and just put the C, which indicates that whatever I'm going to create is under C drive directly. You can get a completely different location. Since this is the Windows platform, the C drive is usually the most accessible to us, so I'm gonna use that one as an example. But you can also create dynamic folders under your project directory or anywhere else. Once this is created, I'm gonna come into here and simply use system IO features. So we can first look if the directory already exists, and we can do that using system.io.directory.exist. Now it could be a chore to repeat this system IO stuff on and on in the application, and it could be really hectic to do so. So I'm gonna usually cut this part and go up there and say the entire application actually uses this specific statement, so that I don't have to type system IO directory exist, and I'll stick to just directory exist, and that's it. The directory that I'm checking is the folder name, so I'm gonna type the folder name here. And inside, if this folder already exists, I might want to display this to the user that it already actually exists, so I can't really create it. We can do that using a message box. So I'm gonna say something like this folder name, this folder already exists. And this is an information box. It's not exactly an error. It's about just giving you an information. So I'm going to use only OK button and as an icon I'm gonna use message box icon information. Now this part is done. I am providing the information that, you know, this part, this folder already exists there. So I'm gonna focus on the next bit, which is actually creating the folder, which means that this folder actually it doesn't exist, and I'm gonna create it. We can do that using directory, create directory. And the only thing you have to do is to put the path name there, which we already did. It's under C drive and my name. So you can basically change this to your name or whatever name you want to put in there, and the folder name itself will go into the create directory. It's also a nice idea to let the user know when this directory is created, just to warn them that, oh, this information, this thing that I did, it's completed. So I'm gonna show that the folder name plus is successfully created. And again, it's an information box. So I'm gonna come in here into the application now, and when I click on create directory button, it will first check if this directory exists, and if it exists there, it will give me that information telling me that this folder already exists, and if it's not, then it will go and create the directory. So let's run the application and also open up our C drive so we can follow up what's going on. As you can see, this is under my C drive. I have a couple of folders here, and I'm going to run the application and observe whether or not this application really creates the folder there. So I'm going to minimize this a little bit, yeah, and press on the button. So I'm going to press on the create folders, and hopefully it will create a folder in here. It says successfully created, and yeah, I can now see the folder. So it's currently empty, there isn't anything inside, but we can see the folder being there. And if I try to click on it again, this time it says this folder already exists. So I'm gonna erase this and press on the button again, and it creates the folder again. So that part is already done. So I'm gonna go minimize this and go back and focus on creating this time a folder. In this application I'm gonna work basically on text files because those are the easiest files to work with, but technically you can create any file format. So I'm gonna copy and paste another icon, and this time I'm gonna call this create text file, and this text file will actually be created under the directory we just created through the other button. So that will be button create file. Let's just call it text file. So the name of the button is button create text file, and we fill the information there. So we triggered the option. Now we need to give our text file a name. So I'm gonna go up and give a name to our text file. So that is going to be any name that you would like to give. So I'm just gonna give my file name as Star Wars. Why not? Just give it Star Wars.txt. So that is going to be my file name, and I'm gonna come down and follow a similar pattern to see whether or not this thing will be created. So first thing first, we can look up if the file already exists. So I'm gonna look into if file.exists. Now we can kind of like look into the entire file, because if I type the file in here, it will not be a very good path to check up. So it is a much nicer idea to combine this all together. So just gonna call it path, and I will combine the folder name plus with the file name. Now this will generate me an error, because whenever I initialize a variable, I am not supposed to combine them like this. So it's a better idea to basically copy this in here and only define the path up there. So path is this, but it's actually defined in here because we could have multiple, you know, buttons using the path. So I'm gonna look into here, and whenever I check up the file, I'm not gonna check up only the file name. I have to check up the entire file. That is because the file is under this folder. If the file already exists, we can warm up the user as this file already exists. We can say something like file name plus already exists, providing that information to the user that this actually is there already. And if it's not, then we're gonna create it. So we're gonna go into the else part. Now that we check up the file and it doesn't exist there, we're gonna create the file. And to do that, we're gonna use file dot create, and we're gonna put the entire path there, which will obviously create the file. And now that the file is created, we can actually provide the information. We can say that this file is created, and put the entire path name. Path is successfully created. Can actually change this one as well. Say that path already exists. So let's try this one. So I'm gonna, as usual, start debugging and open up the folder and go inside in here. We already checked the folder. I'm gonna check the file. So I'm gonna create a text file, and whenever I press on it, I see Star Wars there, and I also see that the file is created. And if I stop this, rerun it again, now the file is there. If I press on it, it says this file already exists. It is already there, currently being completely empty. And yeah, so we're gonna erase this. You must also be careful that whenever you don't have the folder name, this is not gonna create your file. So the folder must exist there. So make sure that the folder is actually created before the text file. So I'm gonna press on the folder, creates the folder, then I can press on the file, which creates the file itself. If the folder is not there, it is not going to create the text file. Right now, as you can see, this text file is empty. There isn't anything inside, which is gonna be our next phase, to fill some information into this text file. And to do that, we are going to write some information into our text file. I'm going to go back to the form and once again create another button. And this time I will call this button as write to text file. go down, button, write text file. Now we can double click on it, and as we did before, we have to check if the file already exists, because if the file doesn't exist, there's no way we can write in it. It must exist in order for us to write into this file. So we can simply copy paste this part in here and make sure that this file is actually exists. So the folder and the file name are completely the same, and I'm checking if the file exists there. Now in order to write into our file, we're gonna use what we call as stream writer. So I'm gonna use stream writer. The stream writer allows us to write into the text file. So we're gonna use stream writer SW, you can give it another name, equals to file dot create text, and we're gonna select the path for it. Now using this, I'm gonna write some text here, and just, you know, any text will go. So I'm gonna say something like, in a galaxy far, far away. And put a semicolon at the end. And in order to write that, I'm just gonna write as write and text. A final thing to do is to provide that information to the user that you had successfully written into the file. It's successfully written. So we first check the file. If it doesn't exist, we don't do anything. It's a nice idea to actually show an error if it doesn't exist. So we can also put an else statement here, and it's completely optional, but you can do so, and change it to error and say something like does not exist, and that should be an error. It is not suggested, it's not gonna work if the file is not there. Obviously this is not gonna work, so make sure that the file is just there, you know, created. So we have the button write text file, it's in here. The brackets can be a little bit dodgy, so if you are getting confused, just put a slash and put the button name before the last bracket, which will give you the advantage of seeing which bracket belongs to which button. So I'm gonna run this application and see if this is gonna work for me. So we know that the file is there now because we created it before, and I'm pressing on the write to text file, and it says this is successfully written, and I'm gonna go inside and see the information there. It says in a galaxy far, far away. And one thing to notice is that we are not using the append style, we are using the overwrite. So each time you press on the button, whatever information you have inside the text file will be completely overridden, and what you type in there in the text will be written into the file. So any information that already exists will be erased. Let's call it Star Wars. So when I save this and run it now, we are not gonna have two in a galaxy far, far away. Like, we'll only have one with a Star Wars at the end. So I'm gonna press on this and it says written down. When I open it, you see the entire information is gone now, and it's written on the top of, you know, it's just erased and written down from the beginning, from scratch. So that is how we write into the files. You can of course play around and append files and, you know, add information on the top of it using different kind of write styles, but I'm not gonna get into that. That is something, if you want to explore, please be my guest and explore it. The last thing that I want to show is how to read the files. So we're gonna read the content of a file this time. So I'm gonna say read from text file. This one has to be a little bit bigger than the others because the text is not fitting. So maybe we can just expand them all to make them look consistent, like this. Yeah, good. So we need to also change its name, so that should be button read from text file, and I am going to double click on it and obviously repeat the same process. So in order for me to read from a file, that file must exist. There is no other way. So I'm gonna copy paste this entire statement in here inside this and only change this part where it says using string writer, because I'm not gonna write into the file this time. I'm gonna basically read the file. So to do that, I am going to type a string file content, which is obviously the content that lies inside the file, and read all text inside that specific path. That will obviously read the file content, and we can now reflect that content into any Windows form component. An ideal form component for this is rich text box, because it has multiple lines, it can show information properly. So we can drag and drop a rich text box here, slightly expand it, and display the information that is being read in this rich text box. So I'm gonna make it maybe 12 or 11 and expand it like to cover the entire buttons like that. And whenever I click on that button, I want that the file information, the text file information, to be read and displayed inside this form component. And rich text box, we're just gonna name it rich text. So I'm gonna go into this part, and rich text box dot text is file content. So whatever the file content is will be actually read into, will be displayed in the rich text box. So let's try this to see if this is going to work for us. We know that the file contains in a galaxy far, far away whatsoever, because we wrote this before. So I'm gonna close this and I'm gonna read the file content, and as you can see, that file content is over here. So if we go ahead and type something else, I love Star Wars, yay, and save it, and read the file content, it will be displayed there. So we can now create a folder, we can now create a text file, we can write into the text file, and finally we can read into the text file, from the text file into any form component. This could be a message box, a label, whatever you want basically. I use rich text box because it's a much better way to display information, but you can use any other form, basically anything to display that information. So before I end the video, I want to show you one last thing. Usually whenever you work with files, you should always use try and catch. It will help us to capture some of the errors. For example, when you are reading the file just after you had written it, it might create some problems for you. So it is a good idea to encapsulate these statements that are directly related to files with a try and catch to, you know, handle the errors yourself rather than leaving them to the compiler to generate compiler errors. It's a much better idea to use a try and catch to encapsulate these errors. This error can happen especially when the file is just created, when it is written down and you try to read the file content immediately after you had written it, because the rights are, you know, just changing, so it might create an exception for you. So let's just create an exception and show that something like a message box. I'm just gonna copy one from here and tell the user that sorry, but you just created the file. So the file exists, but it's just created, so it is kind of like empty. There isn't anything inside of it, so I can't read it yet, stuff like that. So it could be a nice precaution for you to, you know, handle those kind of errors, because, you know, people might not go exactly in the same order that you defined in this program. So let's just try it. So I want to create the text file. So it says that the text file is created and it's there. I just created it, and then I'm gonna try to read it without writing in it, and look what it says. It says that sorry, but you just created the file, so there's nothing inside yet. So if I didn't put the try and catch here, this will actually create a compiler error for me because I just created the file, so it cannot read it. Hence why it's a very good idea to encapsulate your file statements with a try and catch to prevent to have compiler errors and you handle the error yourself. So this is it for today for this video. We had seen how to create folders, how to create text file, write in the text file, and also read from the text file. I hope this video was useful to you, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you for supporting the channel. Have a nice day.